Get started in the interest of the time of the council members who are here on time and the public. Welcome to the first meeting of the Ad Hoc Committee on Economic Recovery and Reinvestment. This is a special meeting for today, Tuesday, March 31st, 2009. We're in room 1010 of City Hall. Myself, Eric Garcetti, Chair, Councilmember Janice Hahn, and Councilmember Bill Rosendahl are both here. We are expecting Ms. Gruhl and Mr. Wesson shortly. This committee was brought together to make sure that Los Angeles has the model programs for the economic recovery, ones that are accountable to the public, but also effective for the goals of the Economic Recovery and Reinvestment Act of 2009. Extraordinary times call for the city family to come together, as it has shown in the past an ability to do so, but to work with all due diligence to make sure that we have all of our ducks in order, both for making sure we get the maximum amount of dollars and that we spend them in the most effective ways here in Los Angeles with a real impact on jobs. We face many countervailing winds. We see for the average working person everything from the home foreclosures and the loss of jobs, but also we see increased costs from state taxes and other costs that have gone up, making survival in this economic environment much more difficult. We have Mr. Parks and Ms. Gruhl here and a quorum. We only have one item today, but just moving forward, colleagues, to kind of chart out what I hope to do is already working closely with the Mayor's office, and we'll hear from the Mayor's office shortly. The Council and the Chief Legislative Analysts are going to report weekly on the progress that we're making. We have, I think, 15 council members that want to be on this committee. We have 7 that are on the committee, so it is certainly a large committee, but one in which the idea is also to have the work groups that have been created in each of the respective major policy areas that the funding streams come from in Washington meet, convene, make sure we know of our deadlines, make sure that we're coming up with the best projects, and to very clearly have some principles that we adopt that I'd like to come back to that maybe we can look at in the actions today in terms of making Los Angeles a model city for the sort of oversight that we know Washington, D.C. will bring to us. In our recent trips to Washington, I think we had some very effective meetings. I know almost everybody here was on one or both of the trips that we took to Washington, D.C., but we certainly have not just doors that have opened, but have flown open, and good long periods of time that we were able to spend with the relevant departments, with the White House, and on Capitol Hill as well. So why don't we have the Mayor's office come forward and the CLA, and we can kind of sketch out where we're at, and if we could also talk through the structure of our work groups and which ones have met so far, which ones haven't, and kind of a schedule for moving forward. I know that we had a representative of the Mayor's office, our Deputy Mayor, and also our Chief Legislative Analyst were at the White House briefing last week, 2 weeks ago?
2 weeks ago.
2 weeks ago, where we had the different departments walk through. But unless anybody else has any other opening comments, jump in. All right, let's jump to business. So go ahead. Why don't we hear from the Mayor's office?
Chairman Garcetti, members of the Council. My name is Jim Clark. I'm Director of Federal Relations, and I'd just like to give you a brief overview of what we've been doing to date and what we've got planned in the near future. The first thing we've done is we've gone through the bill and the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, or ARRA, and identified some 119 programs that are in the bill, and tried to identify which of those apply to the city of Los Angeles that we'd be involved with. And we have as many as 55 programs out of the 119 that will apply to the city of Los Angeles. Some of them are still waiting for the guidelines to come out to see whether we're eligible or not. But what we've done is put together then a spreadsheet basically that breaks down every one of the components of the bill, and we've color-coded it as to whether it's something that applies to us or something that we would be interested in.
Something you gave to us, or do you know?
No, I don't know that we've necessarily given it, but we can make this available to you so that you can have that. So that's the first thing that we've done. The second is that we've put together a spreadsheet to track all of these programs, and that's something that we put together. So we've taken the programs that apply to the city of Los Angeles and then created a spreadsheet where we're such things as what agency they're coming out of, with the description of the grant, when the applications will be due for that, the responsible departments that will be involved in that, any particular notes in that. So this is a basic tracking system that we've started establishing and working with our groups. And again, we can make this available to you.
And that, just to the numbers on it, there's 112 on that. Is that's 112 of the 119, or this is within the?
No, these are the
of the
these
55?
are primarily the programs that apply just to the city of Los Angeles that we have on.
And that's the 55, you said?
Yes.
And some of them have multiple inputs for the same program?
Exactly, yes. And what we're trying to do is clean this up as we and combine them together. So you may have an earlier version that had multiple listings for the same grant program where we're merging them together. The mayor's office has established working groups primarily for those kinds of projects that involve interdepartmental cooperation, and there's a lot of them within the bill itself. We created 5 working groups. I don't know if you've seen this particular chart, but the 5 working groups are, and each one is headed by...
We pass that around to the members after you're done with that?
Yes.
So they can see it, yeah.
There's a public safety group that's headed by Deputy Mayor Arif Alikan. There's a housing working group with Deputy Mayor Helmi Hizarik. A transportation working group with Deputy Mayor Jaime De La Vega. A public services working group with Deputy Mayor Larry Frank, and an energy working group with Deputy Mayor Romel Pascual. And what we have is the applicable departments that would be involved in these. So you take some...
Can I just ask, how do you see these, what do you see these working groups doing?
Okay. The primary purpose of the working groups is, well, in addition to that, we have a technical assistance or compliance group, which is made up of the mayor's office, the CLA's office, Bureau of Engineering, CAO, and what this group does is meet and put together the sort of find out what are the eligibility, the criteria, what are the deadlines for filing, all of that sort of stuff. Then give that information to the working group. It's up to the working group to come up with projects that they think would be applicable and would meet the guidelines, and then out of this working group together would be providing a recommendation to this committee as to the projects that you would then review. And on each one of the working groups, we have a member of the council office for the standing committee that's most affected with that, because what we want to do as we're going through the process is to have the input from council office on the projects.
Say that again, each working group?
So each one, so in public safety, we have a representative from Councilman Weiss's office. On housing, we have one from Councilman Wesson's office. On transportation, we have one from Councilwoman Gruel's office. Public services has from Councilman Garcetti's office, and energy has from Councilwoman Perry's office. So each of those individuals represent a standing committee that normally might look at these projects.
Where would Public Works fit in that?
Well, Public Works is on a number of these, but basically transportation includes infrastructure programs.
Where would the port and the airport be?
The port is on the transportation working group, and let's see, is it also, and it's also on the energy.
My understanding is that if we do it from us out, it's not going to be the way that they've structured the funding. So this reflects the way that the funding is coming out of D.C.
Right.
So making sure that, for instance, the
Right.
port is represented in multiple places. They may be applying for a transportation grant and an energy grant. Public Works may actually hit a number of different ones, depending on what it is.
Just curious, in your initial paper that you threw up, how much money are we looking at? How much is the city of Los Angeles, in your mind, going to get in the mix? And are each of those 5 working groups addressing that?
Before we go to the master number, let's just hear the rest of the structure, and then we'll open up to a series of questions. But just tell us, who's been meeting, when they've been meeting, and then we'll get into...
Each of the groups has started to meet. The only one that hasn't met, but it will be meeting this week, is the public safety group. But transportation, because we had to put together the list to submit to MTA, they've already had 3 or 4 meetings. We expect that each group will meet weekly, and all of the groups have sort of established what their meeting day is going to be. So
Chair, can I ask something? Are we going to get a copy of what you're referencing?
I'll be happy to provide you with that. Yeah. Yes, sir.
This was provided by the dealer.
Did we all get
I
that?
don't have that either.
No.
Is that-
Five committees.
So we're anticipating that each week now, starting this week, these working groups are going to come forward with projects. And what we're looking at is that we're going to devise a standardized sort of one-page summary sheet which will give information about the project, the grant, the amount of money, and a description of it. That'll be something that the working group can look at in terms of establishing priorities, and something that you should be able to review to get enough information to know whether it's the kind of project that you would want to put forward and agree with. So those are the things that we have done. What we're in the midst of doing, also what we're doing now on an ongoing basis is we're reviewing through eCivis and through our DC consultants and our staff as these notices of funding availability, or NOFAs, are published by the federal government on these various programs. We're getting those, looking at them, finding out what the application deadline dates are, and putting those into the spreadsheet. So we're trying to stay on top of that. But like I said, there's a lot of these that are being developed and coming out. We're working with ITA to identify outside vendors that can supply grant management software. We really don't have that capability. We will eventually through the Financial Management Information System, but that's off in the future. So in the meantime, we're needing to have a way of being able to really track these all of this grants, and particularly when the funds come in, and if we're meeting the requirements of the spending guidelines, and how many jobs are being created, and all of that sort of thing that we need to do. We're also working with ITA on the development of a city recovery website that departments can use to be able to input the data on their grants and as they're spending money and receiving money, and also something that the public will be able to access so that they can see the projects that the city is how they're spending the money and the number of jobs that are being created as a result of that. We're working with outside organizations, primarily educational institutions and nonprofits, to ensure that those projects which necessarily we can't apply for, but that institutions of higher education or community colleges, the LA Unified School District, nonprofits, they're going after those grants because that's money that's going to come into the city and also mean jobs here as well too. So we want to try to work with them to ensure that that's happening. We're also working with the federal government on the programs, because a lot of the spending is the federal government spending on itself. And one example is there's a lot of money available for rehabilitation of federal office buildings. Well, we've got a number of those here, and we want to make sure that our federal office buildings are on the list that the GSA is submitting, so that, again, that money comes into us. We're trying to identify grant writers within the city that can become part of a peer review group. A lot of these grants are competitive grants rather than formula grants. So it's not just a matter of filling out a grant application. We have to fill out a grant application with a compelling story and really to be able to sort of think outside the box about how we might be able to use these funds, because there are hundreds of other organizations out there competing for the same dollars that we're competing for. So what we want to do is try to put together a team of the best grant writers we have in the city that will be sort of a peer review group to be able to do that. And lastly, we want to make sure that the proposals that are developed by the working group then, as I said, come to you as the ad hoc committee. So, and there's a short timeline on all these if we back these things up. So we're assuming that each week the working groups will put forward their projects, and either that week or at the beginning of the week, hopefully you would meet, we'd present the projects to you, and then it would be agendized and put on the city council agenda that week, and that hopefully that you would establish a date like every Friday or some day that's going to be sort of, grant application review day, and that we bring these things forward. And it'll be that way for several months until we,
Just in the process part of it, and which may be where I think Ms. Hahn maybe was going to, which is, and also Mr. Rosendahl, which is as you go forward, I mean, I know this is an unusual circumstance where we don't want to hold things up, but I think transparency and more involvement from the beginning is helpful, because if the first time we see it is the time it's coming to this committee, then if there's questions that can't be answered, then it can't go to council the next step. And so I think that, and it may be with those committees you've set up, that, for example, in transportation, where there's overlaps, you
Yeah.
know, Janice's staff participates too. I mean, it's not, we have to look at Brown Act things, but I think in that way, it would be useful so that when we get to the end result, everyone has had some information prior to walking into this room to say,
Right.
okay, we have to vote on it.
Right. And I think at the very least, the agendas of the working group should be made available to us, so that maybe I'm looking at it, and if a port issue or a LAWA issue isn't being discussed, then maybe that's not a committee meeting, a working group I would even want to attend. But, you know, if they are, then I certainly would think I would want to be there at a working group.
And if there's a Brown Act issue
Yeah.
then I wouldn't have to be, if it's a port,
Right.
you know,
Right.
then it wouldn't be.
And even publishing agendas, we have a city attorney that's here, but part of it is, and here at the end of the mayor's office, all this is what we want to discuss here today, is on
Right.
the structure piece. So
Right.
before we kind of all jump in, because I know we all have probably some good ideas of how to do this in the most transparent way. And we're all chomping the bit because we want to get the money and we want to make sure it's done the right way. Let's hear the mayor's office through the CLA's office, and then let's jump in with our suggestions. And then Ms. Rosendahl, and I have the same concern about we got to track how much money, we got to track what the process is, and we've got to make sure, and we're going to rely, all of us, before we start wondering which council members there are not, on the CLA's office of being the lead for all of us on each of these. So we will have council members there, but we're really going to rely heavily on the CLA's office to know ahead of time what's going to be discussed, working closely with the mayor's office, so that then the CLA's office can inform relevant council offices on what's happening. And it won't just necessarily be, it's up to us, it doesn't necessarily just have to be, okay, here's what everybody decided, vote for or against these. But on the other hand, if we bring everything here, and it's like everybody bring your project to here, that's not the right place to be doing it either, because then it becomes kind of a pork committee of like who's going to have their pet projects here. So I think it's important to have that with the CLA's office, the mayor's office, and the departments really shaken out. So
Sure, but I mean, I just must say, I think it's more than just, you know, a port project.
No,
I think, honestly, I mean, I don't think departments have the best track record in always identifying the projects, and I think we're very close to the ground in our specific jurisdictions, and I think, you know, it's just never been the core mission of departments. I mean, they're about delivering services. They're not necessarily about identifying projects. And I think sometimes it's not just about pork or you know, who's bringing, I just think sometimes we might have a better sense. We're closer to the actual entities on knowing what these projects, and many of us have already been, you know, have identified and worked on lobbying for some of these projects. So that's more what it is.
We did that recently with Safe Moves and not Safe Moves. I can't remember all of it. We just did the application to the federal government, and it went fairly smoothly in committee because we had said to the departments and the CLA, we want you to meet with each council office.
Right.
And beforehand, and so there were changes and things that people knew, and then by the time it came to committee, we were able to pass it through without a whole lot of discussion because that work had been done ahead of time. And I think that's our main message, Mr. Garcetti, is to do that, and why we want to have these kind of task forces, so it...
So that's exactly what we're thinking. So let's hear a little bit from, unless there's anything else. Do you want to add some more?
I also add that in the working groups also, we've invited the CLA's office, and I think we've had representative from the CLA's office in every one of the working group meetings as well, too. And we've had the participation of the council, at least the council office that we've identified has been participating also.
Eric, just on that note, as he's given us an outline, which I like what you're doing, it's great. Do we know the dollar figures we're talking about?
We're talking about, we have 7 categories that have formula funds in them where we know, and that's $280 million.
I'm sorry, say that again?
There's 7 categories that they're formula funds, so we know how much and they've determined how much we're going to get from the formula. That's $280 million. But there's probably, you know, there's a whole slew of other things that are all discretionary or competitive, so we don't know. So all I can tell you is that we know $280 million that we're going to get from the various categories, from CDBG to the transportation money to...
That's the City of Los Angeles.
City of Los Angeles.
Carved out from LA County, carved out from the state. Does that 200+ million have to go through a state Caltrans business or any of these other receiverships?
Well, it does. Yes, some of this does, but that's the amount that we know we're going to get. I mean, after all the carving up is done and reality.
And you said there's other grant monies?
Oh, well, there's money that we can apply for directly, like the Neighborhood Stabilization Program. There's $2 billion there, and it's all competitive. So if we write a good grant and we're in a good position, we should be able to get a lot of money there. But, until we do that, until we get the money.
You think about that, I'm just curious if I'm out of line, Tom Sharp. How much of these other funds unencumbered that are part of this? Because I heard, could I be wrong on this, that California is going to get roughly $50 billion over a period of time?
I've heard that.
Back in certain ways?
I've heard that from the governor's office also. I heard Speaker Bass talk about $37 billion. We could be upwards of $1 billion, again, but it's dependent. And then when they talk about that too,
Through the city.
they're talking about.
For the city?
Through
Well,
the
but
city
they're
as opposed
also
to in the
talking
city.
about programs that come to individuals too. So when you get a tax credit for the work,
Right.
the $400 that they're counting that too when they talk about money coming to.
But you're serious about grant writing could produce us up to another $700 million.
Well, again, yeah, it just depends on what we're able to go after and apply for.
Okay, great.
Because we're in a good position on a number. That neighborhood stabilization, I think we're leading the country in our approach that we're doing with neighborhood stabilization, and because of the number of foreclosures here, we ought to be in a good position to get a lot of money out of that. But
Mr. Seeley?
Okay, very briefly, there's not a whole lot to add. In terms of my office, the mayor's office is correct. I do have subject matter experts on my staff going to all the working group meetings, and I am on the
How are you working to communicate with each council offices who have, sometimes some may be there, may not be, but there's a lot of expertise, and as Ms. Hahn was pointing out, a lot of sometimes work that people have done on a specific area. How are you doing that communication to make sure?
Well, again, other than the transportation, the meetings really have just started. So, but our intent is to identify, the various grants and the various programs and who they might impact, and be talking to your staffs on a regular basis, be meeting internally. Chris is the assigned staff analyst, and he works for AVOC. So between AVOC and I and Chris,
Our sympathies.
we will shepherd the resources to make sure that there is communication, and it is going to be very important. I think many of the things that were stressed in the meeting in Washington a couple of weeks ago is that this is a new day from the Fed standpoint. Unparalleled transparency and accountability. The difficulty is the Feds haven't figured out how a lot of this is going to work yet. So it's going to be a huge challenge on the local level. I think they made it clear that reporting requirements are going to exceed what our departments have been used to in the past. That is a big concern, and I think we have to identify up front what those might be and start working on those early. We don't want to get caught down the road with not having the correct data for reporting requirements. From a city budgetary standpoint, it's the only thing, the mayor's office may have different information, but it really looks like the only applicable grants would be the COPS grants and some work for street services. Other than that, it would be, again, jobs creation, construction contracts, CDBG funding for community organizations, et cetera. So there's unlikely to be a large budgetary impact, but a very important economic impact. And I will say it's also going to be important to sort of be flexible and understand some of these programs. I spoke to Bill Fujioka on Friday. The county is getting a substantial sum of money through WIA, and they're going to actually do some formal outreach to cities in the county. They want to partner with cities in order to spend that money. So even though it looks like it's not in the city of Los Angeles box, whether it be the county or the state or partnering with nonprofits, we're going to work very hard to try to identify all of those options as well.
A couple things just to go through. Colleagues, one of the things that I think would be helpful for us, and this is the first level where it's publicly open and transparent and accountable, and this is where the public can weigh into, and we also don't want it to be so done that by the time the public weighs in and says, oh, you're forgetting about this, or has a good suggestion, they have no voice. So that's why, it's one of the reasons we created the committee. But I think their statement of principles would be helpful for us to have moving forward, essentially a prism that any potential project gets refracted through. And we had talked about this a little bit in Rules and Government Committee before, and I know part of it had entered into the report that the council then adopted for its legislative platform moving forward. But here's here's 8 that I'd like to put out there that I had been working on, and if you have suggestions of other ones or any of those 8 you think are lousy, let me know. But one, obviously, first and foremost, is readiness. True readiness, not, making everything shovel-ready that's not, but true readiness. Second is projects that produce jobs. The jobs producing. Third, though, which is not spelled out here, and I think we're feeling a lot of this in our districts, is projects that alleviate the impact of the economic downturn. So there's services and kind of social safety net things that I think are very important to us because we wind up paying for those. We see those out there. Something that helps people like the Neighborhood Stabilization Program doesn't really put many people to work except for a realtor or two, but helps put people back into homes that wouldn't be. So something that alleviates the impact of the downturn. Fourth is projects that have leverage. So I know the feds love this, but where we have funding either because we have partners like the county or where we have our own local dollars like the trust fund and other things would be the fourth. Fifth is the highest level of transparency. Sixth is accountability, and those two are different, obviously. The accountability, we were assured in Washington that the top 10 cities, for instance, on our block grant monies, will be audited. So anything that we stick in there because it feels good or we think we can sneak it in, these will be audited, and we do not want to be a model city, the opposite direction.
Let me ask you this, Eric.
Yeah.
When we were back in the fall, we put a list together as a council. Everybody worked at it and had their
Yep.
own stuff and so on. Is this now gone to the working groups and being looked at, or what happened?
No,
to this?
and let me answer that after, I just have 2 left, and then I'll answer that. The seventh would be multiple benefit. This was something that came up in the ad hoc river committee and stuff where we can do a project, 2 equal ones, but one that achieves, an aim that Ms. Gruhl's adopted in Transportation Committee or that we've done in a different committee. That would be good. And then the 8th one, which I know Mr. Frank has worked on and others, is strategic industries, where as much as possible when all else is equal, because if we're thinking long-term economic growth, we're not just looking for a pothole that's filled, but a strategic industry moving forward like, green sector, healthcare, et cetera. In terms of your question, Mr. Rosendahl,
The last fall, we all
we have that.
gather a list of stuff.
And we adopted that.
And we adopted
That's a general list. What we decided is not for just economic recovery because it's so much bigger than things that don't qualify. So that is for the next 2 years, as Avak pointed out. It's basically, he made the good suggestion, we adopt that as our federal legislative lobbying plan for the next 2 years. We can add to that or take away from that.
They put that into their 5 working groups.
Yeah, that list they have the whole list and they're trying to see what things fit into that. One of the ones hasn't met, but I assume that's, I know for the one of the work groups that's what they're doing, but I assume that's standard practice.
Eric, also when you talked about transparency, and our committee is a good, healthy strategy for that, should not, or I raise the question, the 5 working groups, as they meet, allow the public into those meetings besides allowing the council into those?
Well, I think there's going to be inevitably a tension between, if we make them Brown Act bodies and have public agendas and public comment on them, there's going to need to be a work group before that even cues it up, because we don't even know what to put together on the beginning of the discussions. I know it means more time for us, but it would be my recommendation or my preference to do it here, because then we can really get people to bring in those suggestions, look at everything. And it's also quite a burden on public who's interested of trying to figure out to go to 4 or 5 different work
Procedurally
groups.
speaking, like, for instance, here we are meeting today, the stuff that Jim presented to us, maybe if that had been published like a week
Right.
ago, people get
Absolutely.
access to it, they can wade in, and they can come to this committee meeting.
Well, what I would suggest on the recovery website, and I don't know what one of the things I was going to ask, I don't know what the timeline is, but for instance, like, we didn't have all that material that pointed out. I'd seen that chart before, and I saw the working one. We should definitely get copies, but that's the sort of thing, too, that we could have out there on the website so that people understand what the structure of LA cities.
It would be our intention to have some spreadsheet on the website that the public can access. They can't change things to it, but
Sure,
they can
of course.
access it, they can print it out, and they can see, these are the things that we're applying for, these are the deadlines coming up, this is what we anticipate the job creation.
And there's nothing stopping each of us from doing the kind of outreach we think is necessary. So, for example, if we think some of the ideas and issues that are coming up in the transportation subcommittee, or even a joint meeting with you, Ms. Hahn, on some things that we want to have a greater discussion about what's going forward, it doesn't stop us from having those in an individual, again, without taking too much of your time, but talking about some issues or going out to the communities and saying, here's where it's going, we'd like to get your input, and us being a conduit for that as well, like we did.
I'm just curious, does the mayor's office in its outreach look at, for instance, I have 8 vibrant neighborhood councils. They're all engaged one way or the other, and they're important to me. Are you letting the neighborhood council structure and all of its permutations be somehow involved in
We
this?
haven't, but it's a good suggestion, and I will make sure that it gets passed on to
Let me just go back to your seven guiding principles. So you, eight. So you would like us to sort of adopt those 8 guiding principles as a way for the working groups and this whole process to sort of vet the.
Yeah, I mean, obviously it has to,
fit
first and foremost, it has to fit the federal requirements. That's a given.
Right.
So those aren't our principles. But what does LA stand for in the recovery?
Right.
We're showing the best that government can be.
Right. You know, well, let me just say, because I know it's all about economic recovery and it's all about jobs. And, but I mean, I'm glad you said, what does LA stand for? Because is there a certain piece of this that should be, does it, you know, further some of our goals and objectives that we have already set as a city? For instance, I'm thinking, and it might can fit into one of those categories, but I'm thinking of, you know, the clean air action plan at the port, and it may not always fit exactly into some of those categories, but there is, I mean, we've stood up and said, we want to prevent premature deaths from cargo-related pollution. We want to reduce the number of absences that school children are having as a result of asthma from cargo-related. I mean, we've kind of already said that. So to me,
Consistency with
I think
existing.
that would be
I would
the
like
ninth
to-
one, because multiple
Okay.
benefits
Yeah,
doesn't
I mean,
quite capture that. It would be
right.
something that advances.
Something that we've always already
city
said, we as a
goals,
city want to do this, because are we just going to do infrastructure projects that you know, build roads and bridges, or does that follow something we've already begun talking about, like infrastructure around the port? Because we know landside congestion is one of the number one reasons that cargo gets diverted, and the diversion of cargo has ultimately hurt jobs and, you know, all the trickle-down industries that result of that. So, I mean, I just feel like we've already said certain things as a city, and I would like to, number 9.
That's a great one. So something that advances LA City public policy goals?
Yes.
Okay.
I knew you'd say it. I knew you'd say it better than I did.
All right. Other suggestions on any kind of guiding principles?
One thing, and I mentioned to you the other day that, and although they're talking about a lot of jobs, and it's something that would be an LA value, is whether we're going to set aside some of the money for small and medium-sized businesses that are small and local.
An LA business component.
Because it's one of the things we find on jobs is that the large businesses are coming in as a team. They build the big projects. Now that the economic downturn, they're now bidding on the little projects. So the local, mid-size, and small businesses have nowhere to go. So it seems like if it's appropriate that we can find a way to basically allow small and medium-sized businesses to compete against each other for some of these projects.
Before. I mean, we had maybe the small local business mantra. That
Yeah.
was the one that we had before from that committee.
The thing is, I think the definition, but I think in the past, I think it only allowed, $100,000 on projects, which means they'll always be small and very local. The issue is, how do you get them above that threshold to be given some consideration, unless we block off 20% or 30% of the money is going to be spent on small local businesses as it relates to these types of tasks.
And maybe we can task the CLA to look back, because that, to me, falls into the adopted city policies already. Like that, if the CLA could look and see if there are other items that would fit in that category of priorities for Los Angeles that were
And
those two.
And Janice was talking about the infrastructure. The one thing I think for old communities like I represent, probably the greatest thing you can do is create infrastructure, which then correspondingly developers will come in and develop more often. What holds up most developers without infrastructure, they got to get land acquisition, then they have to build a project, and then we come to them and say, by the way, widen the street, fix the sidewalk, fix the sewer, and they say it's not worthy of that project. So the issue is that on older communities, it's absolutely essential that we have a component for upgrading infrastructure, whether it's street sidewalks, underground lights or whatever, so that developers coming in will find it more reasonable to look at a project in the future. So you're setting the stage for future development.
And this is a little, a little I guess, premature in some ways, but is looking at, once we've made the applications and we're going forward, a structure, and it may be the still existing structure, but a structure that exists to monitor those as we go forward. And so,
Yeah.
on the accountability
The auditing
side,
part of it is, we'll have to be doing
Yeah.
quarterly
and I know there's been
assessments.
some discussions with the current controller, and clearly I have put my other hat on, that as going forward, that there's a group that was supposed to meet last week and I think didn't meet, that's going to go forward, that looks at, and I think it includes ITA and it includes CAO and CLA and Mayor's Office and Controller's Office to look at, again, accountability going forward, which ultimately benefits the city. If we do well, we'll be able to access additional dollars.
We met, in fact, we met this morning just looking and meeting with one of the vendors about the software programs that would be available for doing that. The point I wanted to also make, too, is that even beyond the money that the city's going to directly see in the programs that we have, there's probably more benefit that's going to come through through the benefits that individuals can apply for, as well as the tax credits that both individuals and businesses can apply for. So one of the things that we would really like to do is to do as much public outreach as we can to inform people about the
How are you going
benefits
to
that
do
are
that?
out there.
That's what I'm most interested in, is this process
Neighborhood
of
councils.
openness, transparency, accountability. How are you going to do your outreach?
Well, we're starting to just kick those ideas around. One of the thoughts was the possibility of doing public service announcements in some respects. The earned income tax credit, which has been increased, only about 40% of the people who are eligible for it even apply for it. So if we can do outreach there to people to let them know about it. The fact that there's a first-time homeowner's $8,000 credit, tax credit that you can get, that there's a tax credit for buying, sales tax credit for buying a new car, that there's a plug-in hybrid electric thing that you can get. Small businesses can get write-offs, depreciation. All those things are not generally going to be
Almost like
aware
we
of.
need a working group on outreach.
Yeah,
I think so.
I think
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
a key component of this whole process is transparency and outreach with the public.
And we immediately, I mean, the council offices, we all have newsletters that we get out there. We all are going out with our deputies to talk to each of these neighborhood councils. You know, Dunn can help out with that. That would be one of the first web pages at the website to set up is, as an individual, what can I do? Well, if you're a business, click here. If you're an individual, click here. The earned income tax credit is something that we worked on. I think we started an initiative 6 years ago. Actually, the woman who ran it now works in the mayor's office on the as the area rep for East Los Angeles area, but she worked at community development department, and it was trying to bring together all of these things from healthy children to EITC, all these benefits that we leave on the table all the time. But I think there's an infrastructure in place there through CDD to get out to all of the communities immediately and to let people know that tax credit has gone up, to let businesses, bless you, know that there's some additional benefits they can get out of this too. But I would second what Ms. Hahn said. I think a work group just on that, you get some very enthusiastic council offices there
One thing
too.
we're working with Department of Finance, because they literally touch thousands
Yeah.
of people in the city.
And DWP
that
too.
we basically asked them to start looking at whether there's an attachment to the business form
Right.
that they can send out and tell people with the form, here are all the benefits of doing business in the city of LA.
Yeah.
And it should be a part of that
DWP too.
application.
Yeah, am I the only one that just, this is like, there's so many moving parts to this.
Yeah.
I mean, even when I was back in Washington DC, I mean, everybody I talked to, I said, exactly how does this work? And not one person could ever really definitively tell me how this worked. And yet, this economic stimulus is the only game in town. This is where it's happening. This is where the money is coming. This is make or break, really, for all of us. And, now you're throwing out there this whole private piece where, we're sitting here today still trying to figure it out. There's materials that you have that we don't have, and yet now we're saying, businesses can also, and how are they going to know about the deadlines and the components that make their grants worthy? And, there's this whole huge thing.
Just to throw another.
But it's the only game in town, so everybody that wants to have this money trickle down to them has got to know the rules, and there doesn't really seem to be one rule book. You guys are, at the core of it. You're kind of ground zero. So I go back to my original question: how are you really working to, get this information out? And even these working groups, I still. We've been shut out from these working groups, frankly. I've had staff members who were actually told, no, we don't want to let you know about it because we're trying to keep these groups small, wouldn't give us the agendas. So, okay, if that's me, and it sounds like most of the work is going to happen in these working groups, and I don't want, even being on this committee, sounds like, again, weekly on Fridays, they're going to be forwarding projects that all of a sudden we have to agree on that we think, yeah, go for the money for that. And, where were the deadlines? What about some of the other projects? So, and I do think we're going to be judged on transparency. We're going to be judged on transparency, openness, accountability. And not just on how we spend the dollars. I think on how we do this process.
Mm-hmm.
I think we're also going to be looked at on our process of how we get to the ultimate projects that get funded. So I will say, I think you need to do a lot more work on this transparency and the outreach. And I'd actually like for our next committee meeting for you to come back with a plan on letting the public know how this works.
Yeah, I mean, just taking a step forward, I agree with everything everybody else is saying, transparency is key and all that, is a time frame. Do you have any sense at this point when the $200+ million becomes really available, the schedule that they want to work on, and then maybe the additional grant monies that could come up to $1 billion? What is the time frame? What are they telling you now?
I think on this list of what we identified already, the first grant applications are April 8th.
April the 8th.
And, that's coming up, and we're going to have them through April and into May. We're going to have a whole slew of these. We're going to have a lot of these.
So starting in April, if we got our act together, we can get funding for certain projects.
Yeah.
And what is April 8th? What happens on April 8th?
Well, April 8th is just, I know it's one of the first deadlines for one of the first projects that we could apply for, so.
Well, that's really, I see your challenge. You have a huge challenge to get this thing going. And what role has the congressional delegations had on this? For instance, I know of a particular thing I'd like to see done in one part of my district where a certain representative could play a role. Wondering from you, what role are the House members playing with the city in assisting us in specifics and dollars and follow-through?
Well, I can tell you specifically, we had a meeting a couple of weeks ago with Representative Maxine Waters, who came and wanted to get an update on how we were doing things here at the city, and made a pledge to us that she would be able to, she would want to assist us. And I think that's something that we would look at with all the members. And the way that I see at this point that they can be of most value to us is when we're applying for these either competitive grants or the discretionary grants. There's even some grants in here where it's at the sole discretion of the secretary of the department as to who gets the money. And on those occasions, that's where the congressional delegation and the 14 members that we have that represent LA City can really come in, along with our 2 U.S. senators, and try to make sure that we're at the top of those lists for those grants.
Very important, because I know that some of them would love to be of help to us if they knew what we were talking about. But going back to my original point, which with the time frame came out, April the 8th is the first moment. So between now and April 8th, which is tomorrow is the 1st of April, we have to be able to actually submit to get money by the 8th. What happens on the 8th? Explain the 8th.
You have to submit a grant application. On that case, you have to submit a grant application to the federal agency on their form that ask for this money, that goes after this money.
I see. So then technically, to take my colleague's points here, if you have to do that on the 8th, what process between now, 8 days later, must we as a city to give the openness, transparency, buy-in, and follow through that's necessary?
Well,
and how much money are we looking at on the 8th?
Well, I don't know, this was one for, under the Department of Commerce for NOAA, the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric
6th, right?
Administration. We were looking at, this is a competitive grant that's, I'm trying to see how much money there is, but we basically thought it might be something we could go after for a marine research center down at the port that we would like to be able to do, that we might be able to apply for. So that's the project. Yeah.
Okay, my point, exactly.
Well, we just heard about this. I mean, the problem is, we found out about this grant last week, So, I mean, we found out
Talk about it in that working group, the transportation working group?
that actually is...
Said the port was coming...
That's actually in the energy group,
Okay.
because the port is represented more in the energy
Yeah,
group.
you see my point.
Sure.
I think you just made it.
Yeah. The other thing I want to ask you about timing, we have the budget starting on the 27th of April. We got the con plan, hasn't
Right.
been approved yet. Are you jockeying around any of those schedules to make sure there's participation
right.
in this committee?
Right, a lot of these, particularly like things with community development block grants, need to be in the con plan, so,
Let me ask the CLA this. What do you have the capacity in serving the council to produce with the mayor's office in terms of, I mean, this is for all of us, as well as for the CLA and for the mayor's office, which we'll respectfully suggest, because we never order the mayor's office to do anything, and vice versa. But we will all need to spend a tremendous amount of personal and staff time. Part of this, it's easy to go, oh my God, how come we don't have our stuff together?
I want to spend staff time.
Yeah, no, and so do I, but it's just in terms of also asking the CLA and others, the capacity to do this. In an ideal world, I think what I hear from this committee, and certainly how I feel, is I would love a real master calendar where you see, what's coming up next week. It's not just done by subject area, et cetera. And I realize that you're scrambling and doing a good job scrambling, but,
this would provide...
right.
This does have the...
You can pull, you can pull out the date. It's not necessarily, you can also
It tells you
look
what
at the...
working group is also dealing with the subject.
Right, and you could
It's not
probably
working
code it
group and whatever.
from the application deadline and see that, you could re-scramble the Excel sheet based on that. But what can the CLA's office do in terms of putting this in a digestible form for council members to know what's coming down the pipeline so that a CD15 knows about something like the Coastal Marine Habitat Restoration Project grants, can help you guys out by immediately giving you value and telling you what work's been done or what ideas or who's interested, and so that we can keep our eyes, and the public too can see that, and somebody out there who has been applying to the federal government for a marine research center also says, hello, we've done this for 3 years, City of LA isn't talking to us.
Right.
What can we produce, and what sort of staff time can you devote to this for us to be able to have that in a more, I wanted to meet sooner than later because I knew things were kind of scattered, a mess. But by next meeting, we have to be able, and our staffs have to be able to look at this information in a digestible way where we get the word out, where we add value and information, and we're part of the decision-making process. So what's your sense, Mr. Miller, on that?
Well, as you know, actually, we do send out to all council offices, actually a wide distribution of all grants that are noticed and available. We're going to continue to do that, but we're going to focus those on grants that are coming out under ARA. Whether it's this spreadsheet or whether we can find a format that's a little easier to read. I also don't want to lose any information in translation. So you may be seeing a lot of information, and it will take some staff time to go through it all. But my expectation is that as that's updated, all of the council offices will be made aware of grants that are available, the categories that they're in. I would encourage all of you to identify a staff person that would be your point on this, and talk regularly to my assigned staff people on the various working groups, because clearly we don't know what's going on necessarily in your districts like you would.
But it was that staff person who was told, oh, we were trying to keep these meetings small and you're not invited.
Well,
I don't know who gave you that information. We have council offices at the staff meetings, and
Only the ones that you have deemed are relevant. See, and I think I think you're missing a lot of layers by just putting the chair of transportation.
And I encourage that, short of Brown Act violations, as many different members that overlap on something be invited and a part of that. So, and that would still be my recommendation.
some of these committees already, though, like the transportation one has grown to probably about 25, 30 people in it from a small group. So each week they get larger and larger as we reach out and realize somebody else needs to be brought into it.
Yeah, because again, this is the only game in town.
It is. Now, from a process standpoint, the grants ordinance does require that the council authorize submitting a grant application. I think that's the intent of the recommendation in the report, that it be agendized weekly. There will be a lot of information flowing, but my staff will do everything that we can to get you as much information in advance of any decision that needs to be made. But truly, as was indicated, you pull up the Federal Register, and from one day to the next, there could be hundreds of millions of dollars of grants availability that popped up with a short deadline.
How many people do we have in the city that are working on this?
There's a group of, what?
Well, I have a whopping 5 people. Now, I can't have Sharon or Lynn or my budget team on this, because within 3 weeks, they will have no time to do anything else other than budget.
In the CAO's office, there's one person that's working full-time on this and a part-time person that's working on it right now. Hopefully, though, there's also probably somebody at ITA that's working on this full-time on that.
We
their
could
end of
create
it.
a lot of jobs just trying to get there.
Exactly. Now, one last piece in terms of the grant is we are going to have to be careful about matches. Many of these grants do not require matches, some do.
Right.
So I can foresee a situation where we simply don't have the funding to provide a match for a
Right,
particular
that's-
grant. And that's all going to have to be part of the discussions.
Let me ask you about match. Are they going to allow us to use money already expended as part of the match, or are we talking about always new money?
Sometimes it's in kind, sometimes it's a cash match. Very clearly, though, that this money cannot be used to supplant existing expenditures, so.
The funding that we get that's supplementing something, can what they're supplementing be used as a match?
Yes. For example, a COPS grant
That's interesting.
that requires reallocation of positions, or perhaps an establishment of a unit. In many cases, that might be in-kind contributions. The positions are there, they're dedicated to the work. The grant allows extra services that would otherwise not be able to be performed because of the grant. So it depends on the individual agency and the guidelines. They are not all consistent. The feds made it very clear in Washington they will not have a centralized publication of all of the guidelines and reporting requirements. Each individual agency is going to have their own guidelines and their own reporting
Yeah,
requirements.
let me just ask you this, because this is a massive undertaking, and it's a great challenge, and we all are excited about the obvious opportunity here to get to $300 million and maybe up to $1 billion. With that as our goal, whoever has their act together, I don't care which city or county or state, is going to get more funding. Whatever state has its congressional delegation focused properly on it, they're going to get more support as well. So, Jim, and also for you, why not have a special task force of hired people as consultants or something? That might have a shorter time frame than permanent employees, who grab this huge elephant of potential opportunities for us and work it 24/7. So people like me, look, I'm one of 15. I can't go through all this stuff. Even my staff, they can't go to all these meetings and figure it all out. We can't. It's impossible. Okay? It's impossible for you and impossible for the CLA. So I think, because it's almost like when we're talking about freezes and cutbacks, most of the stuff we're going to do in the budget process, the one group we don't want to get rid of are those that generate revenue. Now, this is a revenue-generating moment.
Right.
The more organized we are, obviously, the more transparent, the more inclusive, the more engaged we are, the more successful we're going to be. So I urge the mayor to think out of the box and put a team together of real folks who can roll up their sleeves, that can assist everybody here in the room, because I can't expect the VOC to be running around dealing with this. He's got enough to run around with.
If
He's already
anybody
doing that
can
for
do it,
Donald
Bach can do
Trump,
it.
See, I use him as an example because he's such a positive spirit.
But I'm sorry, who are you talking about, Mr.
If you sit where I sit.
But the point of the matter is, for God's sake, this is a train leaving the station. And not only do we want to be on it, we want to guide it.
Deputy Mayor Alvarez has in fact been talking with consulting firms that specialize in this thing to see if we could actually come to you for a contract, with a short-term contract for a firm that would help us do this strategic planning and execution that we need to do under this. So we have been looking at that, but I don't think we're prepared yet to.
Okay, because my position is, this committee here is going to only be able to do so much, we're human beings too, but you really need a backdrop to figure out how the heck we get all that bread and how we get all those projects going.
And Mr. Rosendahl, I think a follow-up to your point, it's very clear on the transportation side, and there are other areas where agencies who have not spent their money, the money will be reallocated to agencies that have.
Yep.
So the better
Our
we can
readiness
be,
is so important.
getting it right the first time is vitally important, because then there's an opportunity to get significant.
Can I ask one more question
additional
again, to connect the dots on Bill's question on, we did adopt a list that were so-called shovel-ready. How is that list getting into this?
Well, it's
The master list, yes.
It wasn't necessarily all shovel-ready stuff from what I recall. I mean, it was stuff that we want to do. Some of it was shovel, and some members wanted to put some stuff on there that, is shortly to be shovel-ready, but literally isn't shovel-ready right now.
But maybe by the time it gets to the application, it is so how does that list that we all adopted, how does that flow into what we're doing?
Well, I think the way that that's going to work is as grant notifications come out from the agencies, that list is going to be there. And the working group and my staff can identify those projects that, okay, are these going to work, are these not going to work? Are they really shovel-ready? Some of the expenditure guidelines are 120 days, some are 180 days. There's some money coming out now. In some agencies, there's more money coming out in September. So we're really going to have to try to fit all of the projects into the grant notifications as they come out.
Right. And again, that's where I think the notification to us, this committee, is key. I mean, when you get the application, the notification, then I think this committee should be notified. And then, again, and I remember this discussion before, one of my colleagues, I don't remember who, said, hey, if you find issues with a certain project that it's not ready, we want to know about it, because sometimes there's things we can do, there's, I don't know, I wouldn't want to all of a sudden pass the deadline for a project that it was very important, and somebody else decided that it wasn't ready. That's all. I mean, again, it's just all transparent, it's all open. I want to be communicated to every step of the way on this process.
What I'd suggest, colleagues, along those lines is maybe we adopt the principles and as detailed and added to by the committee, that we ask for a master calendar be sent to all council offices of all work groups. And I think what we can do is, council offices are pretty good at policing themselves on this stuff. I mean, we're very good at it. If we wind up having 3 members from a 5-member committee show up, we can usually work out, okay, well, I really want to be here, you two stay, somebody else goes, so we won't ever have Brown Act violation issues in any given subject area, but that'll allow council offices to, and I think most of the time it's there to be as observers. It's not that each council office comes in with a huge agenda on each of those working groups. I mean, if there are 25 to 30, that means there's a lot of people there and a lot of departments. We're talking about adding probably 2 or 3 extra people. Third, that next week, if we could have a report with you guys working together on what we have applied for. Like we heard that we already communicated to MTA what some of our transportation stuff was. We just adopted in council the transit-oriented district stuff today. That was for projects that are literally shovel-ready, that are public-private, if we get additional economic development dollars. But if we can have a sense of what we've already done. Fourth, I'd like to instruct the ITA to have the website up and running next week. I mean, those of us who have created a website, it take about, an hour or 2 of work to create just a frame of one and put a couple documents up there for starters, and just to give people an idea of the structure. We don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good, and have that up by the meeting next week.
How do we deal with the 8th of April at this point in terms of the first?
Well, there's deadlines that have passed as well as ones like that. That's just, I think that was just the first that caught his eye, and it's actually
The
April
deadlines that have
6th.
passed, actually, what I think we got this information off of eCivis, and I think what
Right.
they have done is, if there was an existing grant or something close by it, they basically put that grant in with the application. So none of those applications in March are really recovery grant.
So the Marine Research Center?
No, the Marine Research one is.
And all right, so you're applying
That's
for
on the,
that?
that's on the 6th, it looks like,
Oh,
not
it's
the
the
8th. I think that was just the first that caught his eye, so I don't think, Mr.
Yeah.
Rosendahl,
There's a couple of...
there's some other ones that are there, but that, I mean, that's the point, is to give us kind of a rolling, deadline. If we could get this, obviously,
And
out
do we
to each of the
need-
council
do we need to
offices.
approve that?
And,
Well, there is the provision, I'll leave it to the CLA, there is the provision where if it's within a 60-day period of time, that can go forward and come back to the council, but it would
we
be
have
our...
to approve it.
It
but
would be our
If we
intention
find
to
out something
have...
tomorrow, it can be submitted by the mayor's office on an emergency basis.
Well, let's just talk
We
about
then
this
have to
one. Let's take
approve.
this Marine Research. We don't approve that, right?
No, there'd be time for us to do that.
Okay,
We're going
so-
to try to have something for you there.
Okay.
We're going to try.
When?
Let me ask,
April 6th
Oh.
is...
Jerry, you mentioned earlier about the approval of grants. Is it the requirement that you can't accept the grant until the council approves it, but you can submit for it without the council approval?
No, there's supposed to be council authorization to submit an application for a grant, yes.
Because I thought it was...
But there are provisions for doing, some of the legislation, there are some provisions for doing emergency type grants. I think the hope is that with the standing agenda item in city council and this committee meeting regularly and the working groups meeting regularly, there'll be a structure in place so that the council can act on these grants and make sure that they're aware of all of the requirements before they're submitted.
We're
The
basically...
emergency, you say there are provisions.
There are provisions, yes.
We're basically trying to work backwards, though, from, okay, here's when the grant applications due, this is the council meeting that would,
Right.
in which to approve it, this is when the working group, or the ad hoc committee would look at it, this is when the working group would finalize it, in working backwards, so that we have that in place, knowing.
Well, I think it'd be helpful for us, not only for folks getting the latest copy of this grants thing, but if there's a way of taking this application deadline field and sorting by that.
Okay, we can do that.
Because then we could see, and most of these don't have deadlines, so I think there's still a lot of work to put in for those, but once we have more of that, then what we can do is we can see the ones that have passed, we can see the ones that are coming up, and certainly that's where I'm going to spend my time, like what's next week, and is there anything that's relevant to,
And then
my
also at
district
that
or not.
same time, letting neighborhood councils and other community
Right.
groups know so that they're part of the loop on this.
Well, that was going to be the last instruction, which was if we can come back with the outreach plan for what Ms. Hahn and everybody else has been talking about next week too, besides the website, what is our outreach plan? Because we can immediately give you some bang for the buck there too. I mean, we can immediately get that in our weekly newsletters, we can get that up on our websites, we can get that out to our deputies who are at community meetings as well, and get that rolling. What I would do, because I've been informed that the city attorney has worries with the principals since it wasn't properly agendized, I'd put that forward as a verbal motion for us to adopt next time, but if you would, in the meantime, communicate to the work groups, if there's no objection to that we all are looking positively on those right now, and we'll formally adopt them next week, if the votes are still there to do so. Yeah,
Just a couple of things.
Parks?
One of the things that we just want to make sure that, and particularly when we deal with the matching funds, that we have to really be serious about what are the unintended consequences. And one of the things I think that is probably most relevant to all of us is that at any point that we're talking about adding people, whether it's police officers, clerical, people that are dealing with street services, whatever, it says we can do salary and fringe benefits. I don't think we can ignore the presentation we had last week about pensions. And if we're adding to the overall funds for salary, we're now increasing the pension. And just as an example, if we're talking 09, we're talking on Lacers 19%, on police fire 28% of payroll. If you go one more year, it's 31% for Lacers, 56% for police fire. Those are some major numbers, so that you can get that COPS grant, you can add officers. If you add to that overall salary, you're going to be kicking into that 56% pension base, which none of us have the money to come back and address that.
That is going to be important, and actually I'll also take this opportunity to say that it will be really counterproductive for departments to insist on having new resolution authorities for positions every time we get a grant program. That happens a lot. I think, as we've said in council, we're going to be shedding an awful lot of positions over the next year. So this is an opportunity to reallocate existing positions to do grant-funded work rather than continually insisting on getting new authorities to do
And
that.
I might say about new positions, we got to look at a second tier of new hires going forward. We have to have an honest discussion about the pensions and the health plans and the structural deficit we have. And we have to propose a two-tier. All new employees have to be in a second tier, which has to be negotiated with the unions and the mayor and everybody else. But we can't continue to avoid the most serious reality of where our budget deficit's taking us.
I'm going to actually move, I think, I looked at the agendizing of this too and the goals, since we're looking at regulation guidelines and deadlines, accountability methodology and goals. I'm going to go ahead and move the principles, and thanks for the advice from the city attorney's office, but I think we're well in compliance with what was agendized here. So they were, okay, so we added, so readiness, projects that produce jobs, projects that alleviate the impact of economic downturn, projects that leverage federal dollars with local or state, the highest level of transparency, accountability, including the auditing stuff that Ms. Rule's talking about, projects that, how did I say yours, that promotes LA City public policy goals, projects that have multiple benefit, and then projects that invest in strategic industries. And I think the city's actually adopted what those strategic industries are through the Workforce Investment Board and
Should we add
Housing
on
Committee.
that number 9, LA City, and as well as proprietary goals? So I'm
Yeah.
thinking of airport goals and
Sure.
port goals.
LA City,
It's not-
including its proprietary departments. And within the public policy goals, to enumerate that small and local businesses, or small, medium, and local businesses was one of them that was enumerated, as well as infrastructure.
Right.
And the one thing, and I know the overall program talks about job creation, but I don't know if any of our guiding principles hits job creation or training to create new jobs. But something
Yeah, that was the first, well, sorry, the second one, projects that produce jobs, so
Can I
it's,
get gang prevention in there?
that's one of the LA public policy goals we've adopted, thanks to your leadership, so should be covered in there too. Okay, so we'll move those principles?
You might
Anything else?
wish to define that as job creation or job retention.
Or retention, sure.
Because
Let's
that
add that.
applies.
Create or retain jobs, yeah. Yeah, okay.
Okay.
All right, and then we'll ask for a report back on what we've had, get the website up, get a public outreach plan
Awesome.
moving,
Committee meeting.
and we're going to be looking at weekly, I think.
Okay.
I mean, I was thinking bi-weekly, but I think looking
Yeah.
at the timeline,
we're
we're going to work with everybody, but for now, I think this will be a standard time
That's
right now. Although Fridays,
I
we
think we
also
have to.
mentioned too, it'll be after council, either on Tuesdays or Fridays. We have,
Now, for my, I'm sorry, just for clarity, now, is there an intent to have an item on Friday's agenda to hear the issue of the grant submittal on
you mean the ones that have already been submitted?
the grant deadline on the
Yeah, I'd
8th?
like to see those.
On the 6th, the one on
The-
the
the
6th.
one- the one
I
on
don't
the
know if
6th.
we have yet put together, I mean, they've just been talking about that.
Why don't we ask the Mayor's Office CLA to forward to all the council offices, anything that's due between now and the next meeting that we have? So that would be this, I think, so what we will do in this one week,
What's due, plus the ones that they're considering. I mean, yeah, I would like to know.
well, then we get a report next week on everything in a more organized way they're out, with all the deadlines that we have. I just want to make sure nobody gets,
I'm not sure, I just want the project that you've already, that you're thinking of applying for. I want to know.
All the,
right, it would be the deadlines for the categories of
The
funding, not
category,
not the individual projects, because
Right.
we might
But
come up with.
also, I would like also, though, make sure the project that you're already considering be forwarded to us.
Okay.
That's
All right.
transparent.
We have 2 public comment cards on this item. Albert Ceja is our first speaker. And then John Walsh, if you'd like to come forward too, Mr. Walsh. We got plenty of seats at the table here. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. My name is Albert Ceja. I'm here on behalf of my small business and other small businesses out there. And I just want to bring to light the struggle that the small businesses in the local area are going through right now. I'd like to read a letter that I wrote to Congressman Javier Becerra.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't mind. I don't know if I have a time limit. Do I have a time limit?
We got a clock. Mr. White, will you run the clock? We usually 2 minutes per speaker. So if you don't finish in time, we'll make sure we read the letter ourselves. Okay.
Thank you. Okay. From the federal to the local level, it seems as though there needs to be some kind of catalyst to help the people of this great city move forward. My father is the owner of a small business in the South El Monte area where the Honorable Secretary...
Can you pause the clock for a second? Can I ask folks to just move their conversations outside? Mr. Miller and company? Mr. Miller. Can you guys move the conversation outside or wait till afterwards?
Bernard's trying to get a project.
Okay, well, don't worry. We'll credit you the time. Don't worry. Go ahead, please.
Thank you. Family business was hit exceptionally hard this year by the recession. Our customers are having trouble paying us, and in turn, we're having trouble paying our vendors. The same difficulties facing the auto manufacturers are also occurring to small businesses throughout the country. However, we have no one bailing us out. I feel that small businesses are being underrepresented in this economic crisis. Over and over again, I hear how the small businesses are the backbone of this great country, yet I feel that not enough is being done to help us out. With the federal stimulus plan, our representatives need to step up and assist small business owners to continue to do business and help their respective communities. This can be accomplished by supporting small business owners in an effort to provide employment and needed health care benefits to their employees. With the state and local governments receiving money, there needs to be some transparencies with the handlings of those monies. Ensuring appropriate allocation of funds to the appropriate agencies to distribute the funds fairly is of utmost importance. The banks that continue to be bailed out by the federal government are not dispersing the bailout money fairly, as evidenced by the extremely difficult process in getting a line of credit. The private sector, which has driven this economy for so long, has collapsed and is now taking the small businesses with them. I do not want to be considered collateral damage, sir. This situation needs to be remedied. By no means am I asking for a handout. The purpose of this letter is to propose an idea for all the small businesses in the local area. Like many businesses, we're suffering from a cash flow problem that makes paying our employees difficult. Company savings are dwindling, and we have to decrease our employee hours to make payroll. So I propose this. At the local level, there needs to be an agency that can make funds available for small businesses that have prospective business dealings but cannot find the capital in the private sector due to the undue stresses the banks are currently in. If there's such an idea already in the making or currently available, I think the public needs to know so that they can be assured that America has not forgotten about the small businesses, the backbone of this economy. If no such idea has been considered, this would be just the time to pass legislation that would help small businesses like my own persevere through these economic troubled times.
Thank you, Mr. Ceja. Appreciate it. What kind of business are you in?
Manufacturing.
What do you manufacture?
Food processing equipment, mostly to make tortillas and chips. And I liked that everyone was, Mr. Parks had mentioned that small businesses are a big stream of economic uplifting to the economies because we provide, I think it's 47% of the economy is small businesses. I mean, collectively, we're small, but, I mean, individually, we're small, but collectively, we're 47%. I think we need some help, and I agree that it's difficult, and I think there needs to be about as immaculate a transparency as there can possibly be, because this money, there's a lot of money that's going to come to this city.
It's very precious. It's very precious money. Okay.
And we need to know how it's going to be dealt with, who's going to be dealing with the money. And one more thing.
Just real briefly, because you've got to try to be even.
I think it would be great if Los Angeles could pioneer a go-between between small businesses and the SBA, because we all know, I don't know how many small business owners there are here, it's like pulling teeth to get some.
And there actually is an assistance program at our community development department that is supposed to do just that, so we'll try to hook you up with the information, and we have some professionals that do act as advocates for our local businesses in LA City with the SBA, so we'll see if we can get you that information, okay? Thank you very much, Mr. Sarah. Appreciate your testimony. Mr. Walsh.
The big change from the 20th century to the 21st century is that every major public works project in America is being substantially designed and engineered on laptops located in Asia. The jobs are farmed out. If you cannot do the engineering from Asia, you get special visas. You come over here, and currently the remittances from Asian visa holders is past the remittances, the billions of dollars that are going to South America, to Central America, and to Mexico. These jobs cannot be held by Americans because people like you stopped people like me in the 1980s when I was teaching shop in middle school and it became politically incorrect and all shop was banned because we're not going to teach children to work with their hands. And now the chickens are coming home to roost. And I want to tell you that Ray LaHood, at the last MTA board meeting, you may have heard Ray LaHood, the Secretary of Transportation, we were told he has a $1,250,000,000 stash. He can spend it any way he wants, and the money's not going to go to a mayor who supported Hillary. And at that meeting, the mayor listened. He looked at the pictures I showed of the ad, the 2-page ad that appears in Playboy magazine, and that seems to be all he was interested in. Callie Carrington, Miss October 2008. I'm telling you right now that sales tax tomorrow is going to kill us. That's why we're holding a huge demonstration tonight at Hollywood Cahuenga. I hope you'll show up at the all-night bookstore. I just want you to know there is a huge slush fund at every single agency that will go to those cities that are politically connected. And you may say, I'll finish by saying he got an extra 2 minutes. I only want 10 seconds. I hope you saw that big thing we had for the mayor. For the president. He shook hands, spent 2 seconds with the mayor, walked over to the governor, and spent 10 minutes with him, the president of the United States. And when the crowd cheered, they cheered 5 times more for the governor than they did for the mayor. This is all the mayor's interested in, sex.
Thank you very much. And I know you were speaking in the abstract. I was 9 years old when the 80s started, but I agree with your point on the vocational training. I think it is one of the most important things that we can have, and certainly one that we've been focusing on here with our help career ladders. Sorry? No, but I was not responsible for cutting the vocational school. We have general public comment. Would you like to come forward? Mr. Walsh? If you'd like to come forward for your general public comment now.
How old were you in 1980?
I'm blaming, see, I'm playing games. I'm blaming the liberals, because as you know, I'm an American Communist Party person. I'm blaming the liberals on this, don't work with your hands, it's wrong. That's what we're getting. I just want to point out that I'm already getting told the mayor was ambushed at the Playboy. This was a Playboy-sponsored event. A woman with a Playboy logo and a Playboy photographer took his picture. I asked him at the MTA board meeting. I said, wait a second, did you sign a release? And he wouldn't answer the question. There isn't a reporter in this town that doesn't have a picture of this 2-page. Want to see more Playmates or more of these Playmates? You can check out the club at club.playboy.com. This is an advertising. In America, if you want to put your picture in an advertisement, you have to have a release. I'd just like to finish by saying I didn't get it straight at the meeting. And incidentally, I'm not like the psychos. I have a job, and I come here when there are no cameras, okay? The Bellwood Coffee Shop, which is in the Pantages building, inside just west of the lobby, went out of business across the street from the W Hotel last week. It had not paid its rent in 6 months. I'll give the Pantages Nederlander credit for holding them for 6 months. I want you to know, and that's in an area where the Pantages is going, it's been lit for about a year or two. All over this city and this county, there are property holders that are carrying people. We're in a tsunami of debt and bankruptcy, and I'm telling you, what this plan is chaotic on the federal level. It is chaotic, and it will not work.
Thank you, Mr. Walsh. That will close our general public comment on today's meeting. We will be next in session next week. We will work out the exact time, make sure everybody has notice. Thank you all. This meeting is adjourned.
Spring break, right?